Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's 2022. I can tell you that. Good morning. Hi. In fact, Monday, January 3rd, 2022. We missed the first 2 days of 2022 because they were weekend days, and that's the day on which we don't do the show. But new policy. Maybe a new policy. No, okay, never mind. I don't get myself into trouble and promise everybody 7 days worth of shows. So people who will try to cash that promise. It's all just in the spirit of fun. We're not doing it. Okay, so it's a new year. What has changed? Not a great deal. We have, of course, the Omicron variant to deal with. We knew that before the new year, but it only now strikes me. Now that we are at home once again with the kids, which is okay by me, by the way, I'm not pushing for school to be open. It's a snow day. One of those days from the before times when it was okay to close the school in anticipation of increased risk to the safety of the students and faculty and other staffers at the school, whereas if you're doing it for a global pandemic, that's not allowed anymore. We learned that in the last election, and I think we're seeing the results of it here in Loudoun County right in front of our very eyes. Well, not now because I'm facing a wall at the moment, but I could be facing the snow and telling you about that. It's not that much. Northeasterners, New Englanders would, of course, Midwesterners as well, laugh at the amounts of snow that it takes to cancel school here. But, don't forget that we just had a giant fight over closing schools here. We had giant fights about that everywhere, but we are in Loudoun County where the school board, I guess now, routinely gets threatened with death if they say they're thinking about closing the schools in order to safeguard everyone's safety. Unless there's an inch of snow on the ground, in which case everybody says, okay, we totally understand that. But I think you might have seen it's good people on the Loudoun County School Board, so I hate to say that they were doing something wrong or untoward. I don't think in the end they were going to land anywhere but on closure today because of the snow. But I wondered whether it colored their decision in that although they were one of the first ones in the area to make a call on the anticipated snow, so that by, 6 p.m. last night, they were making their phone calls saying, well, we're going to have a 2-hour delay in anticipation of the snow. After which, pretty much every other school system in the area, plus, of course, the federal government, ended up taking a look at the forecast, but they all went with closures immediately. And Loudoun, and they probably knew this was coming. This happens all the time. They do this a lot, and outside of the context of COVID too. So it's hard to tell how much influence there's been, but I wondered whether since everyone else was going with cancellation, and they went with 2-hour delay, and then at 6 a.m. they call and say, so this way they ruin your sleep as well. They call and say, no, we're closed after all. But I wondered whether they were approaching things with an abundance of caution because they'd just been so beaten up on in the statewide election. Anyway, it was fine by me because a day off from school at this point is a 1-day reprieve from everybody's going to get Omicron. I assume sending our kids back to school in this atmosphere means that they will, in large numbers, come back infected with Omicron. I guess we could say, luckily, it sounds like what ends up happening for most fully vaccinated people is that the illness is just not that severe, and that's great for people who are unvaccinated or less than vaccinated. Probably a bigger risk. And my hope also is that getting breakthrough infections not as dangerous long term. We've learned a lot about this particular variant's preference for settling in a different part of the body, not infecting the lung tissue very deeply. And I'm hopeful that that's where most of the really long-term damage is done, so that we can eliminate that from the menu of choices, although there are such widely varied long-term effects from COVID, especially the early versions of COVID that, well, you don't want it if you don't have to get it, certainly. And, we'd be wise to perhaps think about pausing the return from school. We've had a terrific 2-week break that came at just the right time that probably kept a lot of extra folks healthy during the break, although, a lot of them spread it at the shopping malls anyway. And I don't know, there's a new set of rules that we really need to get used to, including, as Greg's been telling everybody, upgrading of masks. We've got some on hand so we can send the kids back to school with that. That's fine. But yeah, I'm going to have a different the Omicron talk with my kids and let them know that going back to school, listen, this was always true. And we'll see if they have distrust of CDC and disease guidance, contagion guidance, when they get through with this. Listen, the whole 6-foot thing was always garbage. We knew it was garbage. That was all based on droplet spread, and we've known for some time that this is aerosol spread. But I guess the real, you were able to get away with that last time because, I don't know, I guess the other versions of the disease were just not that contagious. Now, if I remember my terminology correctly, the R0 figure for Omicron appears to be approaching like measles type transmissibility, and the aerosols become that much more important to remind people that you can catch it from an empty room, essentially, a room that you don't know whether anybody's been in there. But as it happens, if somebody who is shedding the Omicron variant of this virus has been breathing in and out in this room for a while and then leaves and you enter and you think there's nobody around, so you take off your mask, that's where you could pick up infection. And while it was probably always true with the earlier variants, they just weren't as infectious, and I don't know whether they didn't linger quite as long, but they were out there and falling on you before, and now it just seems to be taking root a little bit easier. So I just want to teach the kids a little bit about that. In other words, keep your mask on everywhere that you aren't in your house, essentially, and watch out. And we'll see if we can make it through without bringing the virus home. But I'm just sort of counting down hours now, and we got 24 more on our side because of the snow. Good morning, Greg. How's the weather where you are?
It's getting a little chilly.
Okay.
It's possible that we may see the very, very, very northern edges of that storm that the folks further south are getting. We might get some flurries, maybe even a half an inch.
Well, that would be lucky.
Yeah, pretty much nothing.
Okay.
But if you're in Virginia,
yes, I am.
You might see some. I don't know, a couple inches maybe. How many are you going to get?
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to end, but I guess there's a couple inches on the ground now, which was, that's enough to cancel school here, so that's fine. And I hope that they took advantage of, really honestly, I would have canceled it for some rain this morning. I was hoping that they would give us a little bit of a reprieve. We need some of those storms from years past. There was a stretch where 2 years in a row, at the end of the 2-week break for the holidays, there was a major blizzard that closed the schools for another week. The kids loved it. We could have used that now.
Yeah, I suppose. So, let's talk about a few things of interest. Some quick takes here.
All right.
Here's one quick take. This is Dan Diamond writing in Facebook where I can't see it.
Oh.
Because I got rid of Facebook a long time ago.
That's a good idea.
But he essentially says the thing about the Omicron is it's like the guy who gets past the bouncer at the club, but immediately gets picked up by security and gets thrown out.
Yeah, okay.
So gets in your body, but doesn't get into your lungs, as you pointed out, which is pretty good. Now, that's kind of important because there's a lot of it. Virginia COVID cases leap 42,185 since Friday, says Blue Virginia. Worldometers is still very spotty with COVID cases because of the holidays and not catching up.
Mm-hmm.
Up a massive 111,367 over the past 10 days, and the hospitalizations in Virginia are highest since January of 2021.
Oh boy.
Now, if you want details, you can go to the HHS site and look at your state and look at hospitalizations and look at ICU usage, which is, sort of the more important thing. But there's just so much going on, and you're going to see a lot of numbers, and they all should be reported. We know the cases are decoupled from hospitalizations and death with Omicron, but we also know there's still a lot of Delta around. So the U.S. is a little different than, say, South Africa for a couple of reasons. It's winter, not summer. South Africa has a different who's been vaccinated profile, but they're getting hit by Omicron, and now they've peaked, and they're much better than they were even a couple of weeks ago. The U.S. is still dealing with a Delta surge that filled the hospitals, and then Omicron hits on top of that, and so you have an already strained hospital system, which then gets hit with another problem, and so that makes for kind of a bad situation. And so they're trying to deal with it at CDC. And, I would not personally mind seeing Rachel Walensky replaced. I don't think she's done a particularly good job over the time frame that she's been in place. And that's because the messages have been so mixed, and there hasn't been enough explanation of CDC's limitations, which are considerable.
Yes, they've been saving up, and they have lots of them now.
Right. So, you expect so much and you get so little, and it's really disappointing. So already we have Tony Fauci on the Sunday shows saying, okay, we know we got a lot of pushback from our suggestion that you go down to 5 days after you've been symptomatic, and then you can go out in the community as long as you wear a good mask. And even he did not specify which mask you should wear. And says, we got a lot of pushback from the public health people. And there's a very nice article about it in the Washington Post. CDC Director Walensky told the Washington Post the agency decided against requiring a negative test result after 5 days of isolation because the tests are often inaccurate at that point. PCR, or polymerase chain reaction test, can yield positive results even when the patient is not infectious, but nobody can get those, so that's not even what's on the table. Spokespeople for the CDC did not respond to requests for comment. Several public health experts have challenged the revamped CDC rules, and it's always nice to see my Twitter friends in here getting quoted, with some calling them too permissive. Julia Raifman, an assistant professor at Boston University School of Public Health, said the relaxation of quarantine rules, and they're sort of actually relaxation of isolation rules because these are people who've already been sick, with no testing requirement, reflected the broader failure of the Biden administration to contain the pandemic. We've not seen the science behind the decision. It's not a COVID prevention policy. It's the culmination of an approach to not manage the pandemic effectively for a long time. So basically, Fauci said, there's a role for tests, but an assistant to the director to the CDC we talked about last Thursday when I was last on the show, had an interview that said, we're not sure about the accuracy of these tests, and besides, we don't have enough. And it's the besides we don't have enough is the issue because we're talking about the rapids.
Okay.
A new testing requirement, says the Post, may mollify public health experts who have criticized the administration's new guidance but could put an additional strain on the already limited supply of tests. The Biden administration has faced criticism over long delays for securing tests in many parts of the country, complaints that could be amplified if tests are recommended at the end of CDC's isolation period. Well, as we used to say when I was growing up in Brooklyn, among many things that we used to say when I was growing up in Brooklyn, but this one you could say on the air. Tough nuggies. Try this one.
Okay.
You could say what you need and do what you need, and if you didn't do it, it's on you. So you should have been working on getting us these tests a long time ago. So Larry Levitt, very respected public health expert, says there's a bit of a conundrum here for the administration. Many experts have recommended testing negative to end isolation. It's not quarantine, it's isolation because you're already sick. After you have COVID, but it's really hard to find tests right now. The need for testing combined with the lack of tests has put the administration in a tough spot. That's exactly what's going on, and so they should just say so.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Might be a bit much to expect from, politicians, but
Well,
okay.
we're in the middle of a pandemic, and
Yeah.
so the director of the CDC is not supposed to be a politician. The problem is that they keep putting people there who act like politicians, but not very good ones. So it's also unclear whether a single rapid antigen test, that is to say the lateral flow home test, would provide particularly useful guidance on whether a worker is still infectious. Jorge Caballero, a former instructor, he's data-driven, MD on Twitter, former instructor at the Stanford University School of Medicine, now working as a health data scientist, said the U.S. should move to a system more closely resembling that in Britain, where patients are expected to test negative several times in a row before ending isolation. And again, we talked about this on the show. That's the intent of getting a kit per person.
Yes.
Because there's 2 tests in the kit. And so if you're in the situation where you're trying to see whether you could see grandma, you could do 1 test, and if it's negative, take your chances with a little bit more education than you had before you did the test. But if you're using it to try to see whether you can get back to work, which is what the kit was intended for, then you have to use both tests in the kit on yourself 3 days apart. That's the way it should be done.
So a couple of tests is 2.
That's what you get in the kit. You can do more.
I think
you could test every day if you have kits.
Right. True. I know. Well, I was wondering what Britain is saying. If we want to emulate them, and you say several tests, I don't know whether they ask for
more than one.
So okay, 2 or more. Okay,
right. But that's go back when you have negative
at least twice
more
as
than
good.
Once.
Yeah,
including a testing requirement after 5 days would be an improvement, Caballero said, but it doesn't address the limitations around rapid antigen tests. They're less sensitive and less able to pick up asymptomatic cases. And that's the worry with Omicron. Not that the test is inaccurate, but that there are so many asymptomatic cases, people aren't even testing. So it's not like this is going to be the perfect solution. But what you're trying to do is reduce and not completely stop spread. So every objection that says, yes, but you don't catch every single thing if you do this, is not really the point. The point is if you cut the number of exposures in half, that's great.
Yes.
If you cut them in third, that's great. If you cut them even more than that, it's wonderful.
Yeah, sure.
So, again, the report notes coronavirus cases have been surging across the country, but deaths have not yet spiked. We don't know that they will because of that decoupling. There's some evidence Omicron variant is less fatal than other iterations. The nation's recording an average of about 400,000 cases per day.
That's not
I guess they're all in Loudon.
There are very many of them are here, yes.
Hospitalizations have started to rise, but recent quick declines in cases in South Africa suggest the virus may soon fade. And U.S. officials are watching what's happening both there and in Britain with guarded optimism. But this uncertain stage of the pandemic represents a new challenge for public health officials. Remember, people do not deal with uncertainty very well. You have to balance the need for flexibility with the need for a credible, consistent message. And when your recommendations change, even for good reasons, Harold Pollack says that undermines your ability to have a stable message, which is true. And, of course, Tom Frieden warns us, after Omicron, we have Pi, Rho, Sigma, Tau, Upsilon, Phi, Chi, Psi, and Omega.
Yeah. That's it.
After that, we have Omega. So, and on and on and on. If anyone says they know what's coming next, they don't know what they're talking about. We simply don't know. That's why we need to discover and adapt, get data, and act together. I said it differently, but trying to get to the same point on Twitter when I was going over the data we have. We have cases. We know they're decoupled with hospitalizations, so we should look at hospitalizations. We know that might even be decoupled from ICU, so we should look at ICU.
All right.
We have the cases from COVID. We have the cases with COVID. They're pretty similar. They go up at the same time, trying to make the artificial distinction that, this person is in the hospital with COVID, but not from COVID, therefore it doesn't count, is as dumb as those arguments during flu season when we say, that person's in the hospital with flu, but not from flu. It doesn't matter.
It's the same one.
They have to be isolated. They're sick. They have to be, they have the potential for infecting staff. It has many of the same ramifications.
You can't.
And how sick they are. Well, they're in the hospital.
Right. You're not safe
you
breathing
wouldn't
their
be
air.
in the hospital. Start with that. And what's happening with the kids, and again, data-driven MD, has pointed out, the data is pretty clear that most of the kids actually, despite what Tony Fauci said over the weekend, over half of the kids who are being admitted to the hospital in record numbers now with COVID are actually there because of COVID. They're not just getting screened and then, this happens to be an incidental finding. Mm-hmm. And so it's straining the pediatric side of things. It's straining the rest of things. There's a very poignant, I won't say lovely because it's not lovely at all, but it's a very poignant piece in Daily Kos written by an ER nurse who goes by the handle Squire for you.
Okay.
Hospital people really don't like to use their names when they do social media for various and sundry reasons. The last bridge is burning. Emergency services and the Omicron surgeon writes about just how difficult it is to watch your colleagues be overwhelmed by the number of patients. It's not that you can't handle it. You can handle anything. But what it means is you then have to start triaging and ratcheting down the amount of service you can actually give. And, everybody has a different level in their head of what's acceptable.
Sure.
So she watches her colleagues burn out and then leave, and then finds herself all of a sudden the most experienced person in the room, which wouldn't have been the case a couple of years ago. So she writes, people want to get back to normal. I get it. I absolutely do. I do, too. Colorado Governor Jared Polis recently summed this up saying people need to get on with their lives. It's been 2 years of it. People are only on this planet for 70, 80 years. Kids missed out on social activities in school. Seniors in senior centers missed going to the movies. And I, the ER nurse, emergency department ED nurse, says, I say absolutely, no doubt. The only problem is the people who make these kinds of proclamations of wanting things to get back to normal seem to share a common attribute. They want somebody else to pay the price. Polis isn't one of those. He seems to recognize the cost. As recently, Colorado announced that because of unvaccinated COVID patients, hospitals were authorized to turn people away from emergency rooms.
Wow. Okay.
So he's saying out loud to everybody, we'll open up, but people might die.
Okay.
But there are an enormous number of people who want that response, and to have anyone but them pay the cost. Enumerating this would require a long list, including everyone from Nate Silver to Ron DeSantis. And I say, fine, open everything up, no restrictions. But give us the resources we need to tackle the problem. But there's the rub. Because giving us the resources we need to actually tackle the problem would show the depth and magnitude of the problem we're facing, and nobody's willing to reckon with that right now. And when she says that, she links to a tweet that says, the reason nobody wants to talk about triage is because it opens up the can of worms conversation. If I have 10 people who need a bed and resources to care for 2 of them, it's politically much more comfortable to give inadequate care to all 10 than give adequate care to the 2.
Okay. Yes.
So what we're doing is accepting a lesser level of care, and that way we don't have to talk about it. Because if we gave 2 people the care they needed and 8 didn't get any, that would be front page.
Yeah, likely so.
So it's a very frustrating experience trying to do your best and feeling like you don't have the resources to do it, and then just seeing things get worse. And while this is going on, you have how shall I put this politely? Unhelpful people in social media explaining to people like her that this is just a cold. No. Or in the case of Omicron, it's just a sore throat. Because that's one of the more prominent features of Omicron. You get a really, really sore throat.
No, not looking forward to that.
So people like Marco Rubio.
Yeah, doctor, right?
Dr. Marco Rubio was on Twitter explaining that having a lot of sore throats isn't an emergency. We need to open everything up and get back to normal.
All right.
Not helpful.
No. I mean, but you should say, as this nurse does, well, okay, we can open everything up, but everyone will have a sore throat. I mean, and it's going to be sore. And
yeah. And,
I don't want to be crying.
And by the way,
and I'm not going to help you with it.
Some large proportion of those who haven't been vaccinated are going to get a whole lot more than a sore throat.
Oh, yes, that too. But we know Marco Rubio's been vaccinated. At least once. We saw the pictures of him getting injected. Presumably he's kept up with his injection. But, I guess when he has his sore throat, we won't help him.
Right. So how can you best talk to people to help convince them that this is still serious, it's still going on, that milder doesn't equal mild?
Okay.
It may be that Omicron is milder than Delta for the unvaccinated, or it may not. We don't know that yet. It's clearly milder for the vaccinated in the sense that you're much less likely to wind up in the hospital and have a severe outcome if you've been vaccinated. But it's really tough to talk to people about that. And so I happened to come across now for something completely different, I happened to come across an old newspaper clipping of a local report of a poor fellow who got into a bit of trouble, who in this day and age might not be able to get into the emergency room because it's too crowded. Mm-hmm. But summarized the difficulty of trying to talk to people to explain to them that you still have to take Omicron seriously. Daniel White of Elmsford, New York, tried to start a balky mule by applying ammonia fumes to her nose. His 2 broken ribs are mending nicely, and he can see fairly good out of one eye.
All right. I guess.
So talking to stubborn mules has difficulty. And, you can't always get the mule to move, and sometimes you wind up being worse off for your experience.
Ammonia fumes to her nose. I wonder what direction he thought the mule was going to go.
It's if you're in the stall, I suppose anywhere is good because you're out.
I guess so.
That's what he thought.
So the mule kicked the crap out of him.
Yeah, pretty much.
What do you know? Well, everyone knows that you should have used ivermectin on that mule. Is it okay on mules? I assume so.
I don't know.
Works on horses.
But, other little tidbits here as we go to break. I just want you to know that Washington Post reporter David Fahrenholt is moving from the Washington Post to the New York Times.
Oh, well.
We hope they will assign him to Bernie Carrick, and we'll tell you why after the break.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it. I'm sure big promotion, he would call it. I'm sure. I don't know. I think that's an interesting move.
Yeah, and by the way, anybody who misses Chris Matthews from Hardball, don't. He's still on Twitter.
Oh.
And he wrote, I want Hardball fans to know how much I appreciate you. 2022 could be a great time. I tried to warn we were headed too far left.
Wah, wah.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Hi, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Very good, Greg, by the way. This is very professional. Hold your comments, please, until the rest of the audience can hear them. All right. Well, let's see.
So David Fahrenholt moving over to the New York Times. Hopefully he'll just do more of the same of what he does best.
I hope so.
People have been noting, interestingly, that if you try to Google the name of Jeff Bezos' kids on internet and Twitter and Google and stuff like that, you can't find them.
That's a great
He's done
idea.
a really good job of hiding their names. If you have enough money and you have enough, abilities that you can purchase, you can do stuff like that.
If you own the internet, it's easier, I suppose. You could also watch what you say online, but still, there's ways of things slipping out.
I'm not looking for people to say, no, we found them. I'm just one of those interesting observations.
It's one of the best things you can hide on the internet, if you ask me. So
keep
ahead.
it hidden, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to know who they are, I don't think, yet, until they own me. And that's probably 20 years away.
One of the big stories, of course, is the pandemic, which we talked about the first half hour. But the other big story, and remains the big story, is ongoing issues with democracy, and, of course, January 6th. So today's Pundit Roundup is pretty much mostly
Brought to you by
devoted to the
6th.
January 6th anniversary, which is edging closer, and that'll be Thursday. And we have a lot of stories, for example, from Georgia. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution published 3. As 2022 dawns, Georgia Republicans focus on the 2020 election. They're still having an internal battle as to whether or not to back the rule of law and Brad Raffensperger, or whether to go all Trumpy and say, no, we should just elect our own people who know how to turn their back. And then there's a two-parter, part one, inside the campaign to undermine Georgia's election, and part two, inside the campaign to undermine Georgia's election, naming names and talking to people. It's very long, so they had to break it up into 2 parts.
Wow. I read the one.
Well, here's the other
one. Shoot. I thought I was all caught up. Okay.
So Nicholas Wu points out that Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney were on the Sunday shows this weekend.
That's good. One of them's a Republican, so that was easy.
Asked what their most significant finding is, Thompson cites attempts to undermine democracy, calls January 6th clearly, quote, a coordinated activity on the part of a lot of people, end quote.
Yes.
Vice Chair Liz Cheney says they have firsthand testimony showing Trump was sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office watching the attack on television as the assault on the Capitol occurred. They have firsthand evidence Ivanka Trump asked Donald Trump twice to stop the violence, Liz Cheney says. And then they talked about their obligation, Benny Thompson did, that if they find stuff, they have to let the Justice Department know about it. So that covers the topic we talked about last week, whether it's better or not for the committee to actually make a referral.
They might not have any choice.
May not have any choice, exactly.
Are they mandatory reporters?
So there's that. We have a lot of polling about how the country sees January 6th, because all of a sudden the media starts to focus on it. And before we get to the polling, let's just quickly cover a piece that the excellent Margaret Sullivan, who used to work for the Times and now works for the Post,
Wow.
Talked about if American democracy is going to survive, the media must make this crucial shift. And what crucial shift is that?
That's why they sent it to the Post.
A couple of things.
Yeah.
In general, the pro-democracy coverage is not being centered by the media writ large. It's occasional, not regular. It doesn't appear to be part of an overall editorial plan that fully recognizes how much trouble we're in. That must change. It's not merely that there needs to be more of this work. It also needs to be different. For example, it should include a new emphasis on those who are fighting to preserve voting rights and defend democratic norms. You know, people like Mark Elias.
All right.
The Democratic lawyer who sues people when they try to stop people from voting. This new pro-democracy emphasis should be articulated clearly and fearlessly to readers and viewers. That could be in statements from editors and publishers, in advertising campaigns, you know, stuff about democracy dies and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Or declaring, in essence, we're devoting more resources to this crucial subject because it's at the heart of our mission. As a reference point, think about how the heads of news organizations announced they were going to pay more attention to the heartland after the 2016 presidential election.
Yes.
Or how some, at long last, are bearing down on climate change. Then, news leaders, show you mean it. Put the pro-democracy coverage in front of your paywall, just as you've done with much of your COVID coverage. Put teams of reporters and editors on the subject, label it, as news organizations have done with Spotlight in Boston, which uncovered abuses in the Catholic Church, or watchdog teams in the past. So, you know, take it seriously, act like you mean it, and then do all of that. So with that in mind, media is focusing this week on January 6th because it's the anniversary.
It's this week.
3 polls. ABC News, overwhelming majority of Americans, 72%, believe the people involved in the attack on the Capitol were threatening democracy, while 1 in 4 Americans believes the individuals involved were protecting democracy.
Those guys are wrong.
Broken down by party ID. Democrats are nearly unanimous, 96% believing those involved were threatening democracy. Republicans are more split. 45% saying it was a threat and 52% saying those involved in the riot were protecting democracy.
That's backwards.
So Republicans are about a quarter of the country, and if half of them are saying that the rioters were protecting democracy, the insurrectionists are protecting democracy, it's a small number.
Yes.
It's distressing that it's a number at all, but it's a small number.
12.5%. But actually
the ABC Ipsos poll, which was conducted by Ipsos, also shows strongly aligned views among Democrats regarding Trump's responsibility. 91% believing Trump bears either a great deal or a good amount. A strong majority, 78% of Republicans, believe the former president bears some or no responsibility for the day's events. That's where the January 6th committee can make a difference. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they do.
I like that.
The public phase of it is coming up in the next month or so. Post-UMD poll. That's University of Maryland, I suppose.
I like the way they put this, that Trump bears a great deal part. He'll probably think, that's great. That's good news for me. My name is associated with great deals. A great deal. We've got to make great deals.
You're a great big butt. See, I'm great.
Right. You've made a great deal of mistakes, and
right.
And you've made a great deal of you've contributed a great deal of our problems. But you had to make great deals. So
it's a great deal. Yeah. So we're going to make a great deal out of it. So the Post says the percentage of Americans who say violent action against government is justified at times stands at 34%.
Awesome.
It's the same 33, 34, 35% that we often see if you drill down.
That feels like more percent.
Yeah. Often we get the 23, 24. Yes. That's the hardcore.
Yeah,
because those are the ones who still thought Nixon was right. Again, the view is partisan. The new survey finds 40% of Republicans, 41% of independents, and 23% of Democrats saying violence is sometimes justified. Boo, Democrats.
It's a weird question, and I'm sure that there are probably people answering it across the spectrum. Well, I mean, what do you mean? Sometimes, like, if we're taken over by communist Chinese, then sure. I see what you mean. But how many of you are answering the question?
It's interesting because one of the surveys actually broke down, well, what do you think is worth getting violent over?
There you go. Now, let's ask.
And it wasn't elections that led the list.
Food.
No, it was civil rights.
Oh, okay. Well,
Well, the reality in this one of all those fears is that there are some Americans who generally view force or political violence, says CBS, depending upon the situation. That applies to the violence on January 6th, to a few for whom 2020 remains unsettled, but also extends to other issues from abortion and gun policy to civil rights, and it's partially related to beliefs that political opponents are an existential threat or being convinced they'll do worse to you. We stress this is not how most people feel, and that those who do are a low number in percentage terms, but then we've also seen that it doesn't take a large number to provoke these wider concerns in the nation. That's where politicians come in, because if you are egging those folks on, you're responsible.
Yes, or as the kids say today, edging them on.
Well, fine.
They are wrong, but, they're kids. So
yeah,
I learned that from Turning Point USA something convention video thing.
Well, words change and the language change, and you got to keep up. I'm still trying to deal with winging.
That's a nice way of putting it. Okay.
WHING about what's going on. It's whining. There's no G.
Okay. Just checking.
I'm old.
All right. Well,
I'm so old I don't see the letter G.
Right. Some people
happens
don't see
every
color.
time I get my ass checked. What's it? I don't know. Letter G. I don't see letter G.
Sure. People used to see letter S and said it looked like an F.
Yeah, well. January 6th panel, says the New York Times, faces difficult questions as anniversary of Capitol riot approaches.
Okay.
Right? So obviously the problem wasn't the insurrectionists, it's the panel. They're the ones having the problem.
They keep seeing it. That's the issue.
Yeah. Our party has to choose Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the vice chairwoman of the January 6th committee, and one of two Republican panel members, said Sunday on Face of the Nation, we can either be loyal to Donald Trump or we can be loyal to the Constitution. You can't be both. And right now there's far too many Republicans who are trying to enable the former president. Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, the minority leader, emphasized his party's opposition to the riot, although he didn't mention Trump.
Okay.
He rebuked Democrats, accusing them of using it as a partisan political weapon to further divide our country, he said. I think what he meant to say is they're using it as a partisan weapon to try to preserve democracy.
Yes, right. They're pointing out who did the riot, and that's partisan. So
right. And here's where the Benny Thompson thing about the referral comes in. In a series of separate televised appearances on Sunday, Ms. Cheney and Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, and the committee's chairman pointedly did not rule out making criminal referrals to the Justice Department. If we find something that's irregular or illegal, we are obligated to report it, he said.
That's true. I don't even know if that's true, but it sounds scary, so good.
Well, I feel an obligation. It's not the same thing as I'm a mandated reporter.
Right, yes. I mean, but he did say, all he said was, we're obligated by my own feeling of obligation, and I'm the chairman.
Exactly. And that's what separates Democrats and Republicans when it comes to governance. So that makes perfect sense. He said, while the committee has already asked 2 sitting Republicans, Scott Perry of Pennsylvania and Jim Jordan of Ohio, for testimony, more interview requests were possible.
Sure.
What people saw on January 6th with their own eyes was not just something created at one moment. It was clearly what we believe based on the information we've been able to gather, a coordinated activity on the part of a lot of people. And then they go on about watching the attack unfold in the dining room and that sort of stuff. And then gets very interesting, and this is where David Fahrenthold could help us maybe.
Yeah.
The committee's obtained more than 35,000 documents so far, including a trove released on New Year's Eve by Bernard Kerik, the former New York City police commissioner. They should add the disgraced former New York City police commissioner.
Right, like troubled rocker Tommy Lee.
Who was involved in Rudy Giuliani's effort to investigate claims of voter fraud. Among the documents Mr. Kerik turned over to the committee is a 22-page strategic communications plan to overturn Biden's victory and install Mr. Trump for a second term.
Why?
That's what he turned over.
By Bernie Kerik. Yeah. Good.
That's
great.
what he turned over. We have 10 days to execute the plan to certify President Trump, the document said. Goal, nationwide communications outreach campaign to educate the public on the fraud numbers and inspire citizens to call upon legislators and members of Congress to disregard the fraudulent vote count and certify the duly elected President Trump. That's the one he turned over. The one he didn't turn over says, draft letter from POTUS to seize evidence in the interest of national security for the 2020 elections. He says that, presidential privilege. It's privileged information. You can't have it because I'm president. Well, no, you're not. Oh, okay. Well, Trump is president.
Well, was supposed to be.
Okay, well, so hopefully the Supreme Court will decide on some of that stuff fairly quickly. Some of the archivists who used to be like head of the National Archives said that firstly, Trump needs to turn him over, and secondly, there could be some really damaging material there. Otherwise, why is he fighting it so much? So, the point here is it's a draft letter from POTUS to seize evidence in the interest of national security for the 2020 elections. And Will Bunch writes, this is like really important. Don't lose fact that here is evidence that basically that ties everything together, that speculation that Just Security had and we all had about, well, the reason the National Guard didn't show up is because Trump wanted them to go in there and start beating people up and then declare a national emergency, but the left didn't show up, and so he didn't want to use them on their own people, so he wouldn't let them go.
Yeah.
And it was all part and parcel of this draft letter from POTUS to seize evidence because it's all part of the same idea that, once that happened and then he gets to invoke some sort of national emergency, Insurrection Act, something, and then declare that like he's president for life and everybody has to wear their underpants on the outside or whatever it is that he was going to do. And so, Bernie Kerik is going to stonewall that because it's probably important. And so the immediate question that comes to my mind is, it says draft letter.
Yeah.
Well, when you do a draft,
yes,
you don't do it for yourself alone. You circulate it. You send it to people. You get feedback.
Right.
Your comments are in blue, mine are in red, yours are in orange. That's how I can tell who said what, that sort of thing.
Right.
So therefore, how many other copies are there, and who has them? Why is it only Bernie Kerik? So he was stonewalls. What if the committee already has another copy from somebody else?
That'd be interesting to know. I mean, I guess it's possible. They weren't particularly competent people, so it might just be draft is what you put on it until it's final. And I didn't show it to anybody.
Still, the point is, how many copies are there?
I don't know.
Do you think that look at the first 4 words. Draft letter from POTUS. That's the key thing there.
Yes.
This is Donald Trump writing to everybody else about what he wants to do.
Well,
are we to believe that the only person that Trump wrote to is Bernie Kerik?
I don't think Trump wrote it. I think that's Kerik saying, this is a draft of what I would like the president to sign.
From POTUS.
Yes, that the letter will be from POTUS if he agrees to sign it. This is my draft of what, he doesn't
So
write anything.
if Kerik wrote it,
yeah,
then who did he send it to?
Yeah. Now that's the question, right? It could be lots of people. It could be nobody.
I mean,
it could be incompetent.
the point is Kerik cannot be the only person who has a copy of this.
If he's terribly incompetent, it's possible.
Well, I wrote it, but I never sent it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he'll claim, and I guess it's possible is that he might have said,
then
I
if
drafted
somebody else
it and
has
I'm
it,
stupid.
then he's perjury.
Yes, right. That's fine. Totally cool by me to hold him on that. Yeah, I don't know how much he's circulated. I doubt that he kept it to himself because he was probably proud of it and the more people, if you show it to the right people, they'll be able to help you pressure the president to send it.
Speaking of the right people, the document was created around the time some of Mr. Trump's advisors, including the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, were discussing seizing voting machines and invoking national security emergency powers after the election. So just like the PowerPoint, it isn't just a question of who wrote it, it's who saw it.
Yeah, and you're right that it would be very likely that he might have shared it with, probably with Mike Flynn if they were familiar with one another, and there's every reason to believe that they would be, because he would think this is somebody who can help me push Trump to do this. But certainly, I imagine his closest connection is with Giuliani, and it was probably a copy of that in the boxes seized from his house. So
was there a copy of that at the Willard Hotel?
Very likely, you would think Eastman would be the kind of person.
We don't know. It's the kind of thing that the committee really should try to nail down, because it's like, this is how you draw the lines and connect the dots and say, okay, this is what they knew.
Yeah.
And did Mr. Trump call the Willard? Apparently he did. Did Willard call the White House? Apparently they did. Well, who would know about that? Mark Meadows. So, that's the kind of thing that the committee needs to get on TV so that people understand what was going on here.
Yeah. Well, I believe that if they have that lead, they're probably pursuing it for exactly the reason that you said. They just haven't. I don't know whether they've nailed it down. And then again, it's entirely
I don't know if
possible
they haven't.
that.
And although Will Bunch is hopeful it's a smoking gun, I'm with Marcy Wheeler. I don't think there will be any smoking guns here. But the point is to tell that narrative. And tell that narrative without Jim Jordan jumping up and down on the table, because then you get to say, not only is Jim Jordan not on the committee for the reasons that we want to explain to you what's going on, he was part of it. That's why we asked him to be here. At the very least, he was in discussion with Trump all day, and Jim Jordan is perfectly welcome to come to the committee and tell us what he told Trump about the violence. But so far, he says he just has talked to Trump so often he can't remember what he said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll find out.
I'd rather have that be the Jim Jordan focus of the committee than Jim Jordan being the focus of the committee. Never mind that. What about Benghazi?
Right. Well, it will be very interesting to see whether they can get him in front of the committee and answering questions. I don't. Well,
they won't. So, but again, this is about telling a narrative. Yeah. They had their chance to be in front, and they already decided they don't want to be.
All right. Fine by me. We'll see what we find out about the memo. I'd like to read it. That'd be fun at the minimum. I can't imagine that somebody like Bernie Kerik goes through all that work and doesn't share it with somebody. I mean, he wants to be patted on the head for his work.
Yeah. Firstly, I'm skeptical that Bernie Kerik is the guy to write that memo.
Oh, well, that's possible too. I'm just as skeptical.
Given what his skill sets are. Hard to believe he wrote the memo. That would be crafted by a lawyer and or the communications squad there,
I guess.
Not Bernie.
Then again, the whole thing's being run by a pillow guy, so guessing.
Well, so if the pillow guy wrote it and sent it to Bernie, who else has it?
Well, I don't know. All I'm saying is, ordinarily I would say, I don't want a memo from Bernie Kerik because he doesn't know what he's talking about. But could he have written it? Shouldn't have. Not just for legal reasons, but because he's unqualified to do so. But then again, so is a pillow guy, I think, generally speaking, unqualified to do what he's doing, and yet he's doing it. So there's every reason to believe that Bernie Kerik is in over his head. I think examining the memo will tell you pretty quickly whether he wrote it or not, though.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess it'll be a while before we get to examine it. But we could look. I mean, we could also look through the one that he did turn over, and probably a pretty good chance he didn't really write that either. So
yeah, pretty much. And maybe it'll have the authorship of who did write it.
Yeah, maybe even in the metadata or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
and, if people commented on it, then in the metadata you could see who read it, because they must have read it because they made a correction.
Right. And, you're in luck, by the way, if you're the one who left the comment behind, oh, my God, we can't do this. This is so wrong. Like,
yeah, well, we'll be looking for that. Wait a minute. We're having trouble finding it.
Yes.
This document's been altered because I said clearly.
Right. So. In
crayon on the top.
I have, there are such people. They believe everything's been altered all along the way. So,
right. So, again, to finish up this segment, we'll go back to the pandemic and just mention a couple of things. San Francisco may be peaking in terms of their hospitalizations. Bob Wachter from UCSF writes that. But at the same time, too early to tell. And after the mixing and matching from the holidays, things can go right back up again. So nobody's declaring success. Yes. And victory at this point. The interesting article in the New York Times about New York City and how they deal with Omicron. I was there on Thursday, and I can verify that a lot of this is true. Will Omicron meet its match in the perseverance of New Yorkers? A new variant is surging, but vaccination rates are high. Face masks are ubiquitous, and residents are finding ways to soldier on. Even as Omicron has torn through the country, upending everything, setting case records, canceling flights, causing long lines at testing sites, threatening smooth reopening of school, returning us to the devotional of the propane heat lamp, that is to say if you eat outside. It's hard not to feel for New York, because New York's all about food. It's hard not to feel for New York an appreciation that is snobbish, imperious, and unambivalent. Rivaling nearly any place on earth, the city's vaccination rate among adults who have so far received one shot stands at 92%, a figure achieved before a mandate requiring private sector employees to have their workers immunized went into effect this week. Mask wearing on the subway and even on the street, where you don't have to cover your face unless you're avoiding cloudbursts of weed, is robust to the point that we must imagine at least public health officials in other places dumbfounded and envious. There's a matter-of-factness and a lack of whimpering, which gets everybody through, as the playwright Paul Rudnick put it on Twitter the other day.
Okay.
So that's like the opposite of fear-mongering. Every time somebody says, well, you're talking about how bad things are, you're fear-mongering. No, I'm a New Yorker. You put your mask on, you just do what you need to do. But by the way, this is what's going on. That's not fear-mongering. Just because you don't want to hear it, that's not fear-mongering. And, in talking about the pandemic and statistics and where we're at and what public health people are saying and trying to interpret what we know, and I spent a lot of my time on Twitter doing that, I have seen an inordinate number of trolls show up this week.
Oh.
And I say this week because you look at their Twitter feeds, they have 35 followers, they've made 17 comments, and they're all en masse writing things like, it's just a cold, or it's just a sore throat. I mean, you really have to wonder when you look at stuff like that how much Russia's paying them. I mean, they can't be that stupid. It's impossible. Bernie Carrick isn't that stupid.
No, and he doesn't want a cold or a sore throat either, I'm sure.
But they're out there.
Yeah, Russia newly active in a lot of fronts. It wouldn't surprise me if they were active again on this front.
So this is Marco Rubio on December 31st. Record numbers testing positive for a sore throat isn't a crisis.
Right, yes, I know, right.
And people in the hospital for car accidents testing positive isn't a surge. The real crisis is the irrational hysteria, which has people with no symptoms waiting hours for a test or missing work for 10 days. God forbid it should affect the economy.
Yeah, I guess. I don't really,
so his message basically is trying to get people killed, which is what's happening in Florida.
Yeah.
They're doing pretty well on the death thing there.
You should just go and do it direct.
I even have that graph.
Marco.
On how Florida is doing. And again, this is by, at least presented by Bob Wachter. He didn't do the graph. He says, graph by credible source, prefers anonymity, vividly shows value of vaccines for both individuals and states since July 1st. Now, there's some outliers in the Bay Area. Florida's an outlier. Florida has, they claim 65% of the population fully vaccinated, but have a really high death rate. Now, that could be for a couple of reasons. They have a lot of people over 65, like in the villages. Mm-hmm. The villages are pretty well vaccinated, but there's a pretty high death rate there.
Well,
Sumter County, which is where the villages are, is in that situation. It could be because they're doing okay on vaccination, but they refuse to wear masks. Mm-hmm. Or it could be that they're lying about the vaccination rate. Mm-hmm. True, that those are really snowbirds, that the New Yorkers coming down there are vaccinated, then they leave. And the Floridians who are left behind, they're not that vaccinated. Hard to know.
Could be.
Because they don't tell us.
They won't either.
Could be any of those things. Probably the over 65s because they're the ones who are most at risk. But still, Florida in an unenviable situation of matching the death rates of places like West Virginia, Montana, and Wyoming.
Yes. It is happening. They disappeared for the charts. They could only hide it for so long.
Whereas, for example, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut have one of the lowest death rates, even after that huge jump at the beginning when it first hit there.
All time. Well, they're not great, but they're no longer at the top of the charts. That's for sure.
Yeah, this is COVID death rate since July 1st, 2021.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To give you an idea of what's going on, like lately.
Yes. Okay. I can buy that. Yeah. I mean, they were really hit hard, so they remained at the top for.
They remained at the top, but they learned their lesson. They all got vaccinated. They wore masks, as we saw from that New York City story.
They pushed them.
Now, when I was wandering around Midtown, there were shops, small businesses open, but only 6-7 people allowed at a time, and they were pretty strict about that.
Yeah. Well,
party of 3 wants to get in the door. Nope, 1 can come in. The other 2 have to wait.
They're pretty well practiced at dealing with crowds, and for all the people who say, I can't believe they even wear their mask out on the street. Have you been?
Oh yeah, about half the people wearing the mask on the street.
Yeah, I mean, if you've actually been, or even just seen video and understood that you were looking at a street scene, a typical street scene in New York, it's crowded on the street. I mean, hello, I guess if you have no experience with New York City, maybe you don't know it, but you're...
Now to be fair, Midtown isn't Brooklyn, Bronx, or Staten Island.
Right.
I wasn't in those places, can't report there, but I'm telling you what I saw.
Yeah,
anyway,
I believe you.
That's what I saw, and I'll tell you what I saw between now and Wednesday, on Wednesday when I'm back.
Right. Unless you're hired by the New York Times in between now and then. I mean, could happen. It happened with Farenthold. Could happen with you, too. Wouldn't that be fabulous? Would you go? I hope
no.
Okay. All right, well, then we will see you Wednesday. Thanks, Greg. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg's gone. Ooh, he's been hired away by the New York Times at 3 times the salary is our constant joke. All right. Yes, although he did express some remorse for not having remembered that he could tell everybody that Marjorie Taylor Greene has been banned from Twitter, or as they say, permanently suspended. And that's kind of good news, as many other people have pointed out. Well, she still has her official account, and I guess we just sit there and watch and wait. I guess so. Her personal account, which I don't know how good she was at separating the types of content. I mean, she's awfully dumb, so there's every possibility that she, will screw it up in the future, even if she somehow hasn't screwed it up in the past. But we're talking about the difference between her I'm Marjorie Taylor Greene private citizen sort of type person, the account she had back when she only was a QAnon conspiracy theory kook running around, blabbing about nonsense. And then the one that she got when she became a QAnon kook who ran around blabbing about nonsense officially on behalf of the people of Northwest Georgia as a member of Congress, that's still there. So the representative, or I don't know what she uses, Rep MTG or Rep Marjorie Taylor, I don't know how, who cares? It doesn't matter. She's still got that one. So I guess she hasn't used to date that account to do as much egregious lying and misleading as the other account, but I don't know really what the justification is for Twitter to say, well, we'll differentiate as between these two accounts. They're run by the same person, or presumably run by the same person. I guess they might think, the reality of it might be, well, I do my own tweeting on my personal account, and the Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene one. I don't even know the password to that one. My staff does that one, and they do lots of outrageous stuff, and maybe even do stuff. They might end up doing stuff as outrageous as I did with my personal account, but it will be them doing it and not necessarily me. But I don't know why Twitter decides to differentiate and say, well, you haven't done anything crazy with this account, so we'll leave that account, even though we have come to the determination that you, while you are personally presumed to be, by us, presumed to be in charge of both accounts. That's why we verified both of them. You are crazy over here, but haven't been crazy over here, but we're banning you from this platform on this account, but you control this other one. So why would you leave yourself open to that kind of exploitation? And I don't know. Then I guess the answer there is, well, we're afraid of the pressure that we're going to get from the right wing, or even possibly some left wing components who would say, well, you're banning a member of Congress, a duly elected member of Congress, from communicating with the public at large, their constituents, etc. Well, no, you're not. You're only denying them the use of this particular platform. They got plenty, including plenty of taxpayer-paid platforms that they can reach in real life. So anyway, so she's been banned, and that's great. And, I'll take it for what it's worth. She also already issued a rebuttal, although where she issued it, I have no idea. I guess one of the other social media platforms, and Greg has helpfully provided a screenshot of it for us here, in which she says, Twitter is an enemy to America and can't handle the truth. That's fine. I'll show America we don't need them, and it's time to defeat our enemies. They can't successfully complete a communist revolution when the people tell the truth. By the way, you absolutely can successfully complete a communist revolution when the people tell the truth, mostly because you kill the people. But, it doesn't have to be a communist revolution in order for that to be true. Social media platforms can't stop the truth from being spread far and wide. Big tech can't stop the truth. Communist Democrats can't stop the truth. Apparently nobody can stop the truth. I stand with the truth and the people. We will overcome. That's nice shades there to cop someone else's line and to do it incorrectly. But anyway, let's see. I guess the source of it will be in the it says see tweet. Am I seeing the previous tweet that went along with it? Yeah, okay. It's this is Tia Mitchell, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Washington correspondent, providing the excerpt. Now, where Representative Greene has released a lengthy statement about her Twitter suspension. Here's the excerpt. So, I don't know. She put out a press release, and I guess Tia Mitchell got an electronic copy of it and took that screenshot. It's the same as always, and it's as threatening as anything else. And again, I guess I would say to Twitter, so she used another platform. Here's what happened. Evaluate this. You banned her personal account, and you made the decision not to ban all of her accounts for reasons. Let's say they're good ones. And probably among them is, well, she hasn't been crazy with this account. So she immediately goes to another outlet that she has available to her in an official capacity, and then does crazy stuff. Twitter is an enemy to America. It can't handle the truth. Communist accusations, et cetera, et cetera. If that's not enough for you, that's not enough for you. Well, whatever. But the point is, the pattern is there. If you ban this account on this platform, she'll just go to one of the other things she has and do more. So you might as well get rid of the other one too. I don't know. Although I guess then they would point to it and say, well, she issued that statement elsewhere. She didn't do it with her remaining Twitter account, so I guess that's also an indication that she's just not going to. I don't know whether that's predictive or valuable. It may also be that she says, well, sure, I could go to my other Twitter account and do this, but now I hate Twitter, so to spite them, I'm going to do this on Gab, Parler, Instagram, whatever. I don't know what, or just distribute these press releases and have people take pictures of them and distribute them for me on Twitter, just like Donald Trump does. And we're all guilty of helping him continue to do that. I don't know. I mean, she'll make things worse for herself at some point later on, and they'll ban that one too. And then there'll be a fight over whether or not you can ban official accounts like that. And I don't know. I'm not certain how they'll settle that one. But she's a horrible person, and anything that frustrates her, even for a few minutes, is a great idea. Continue to do it. Okay. Let's see. Direction that I might take you in today. Why, there are so many of them, I don't even know which one to take. Should we continue scaring the crap out of you like we did last Friday? I think I will. How do you like that? I bet you were hoping that wouldn't be the case. I'm starting to think I might not be able to just do this on Fridays. So, follow up from Friday, which was, the story was, we read, what the hell did we read? I'll have to go back in the archive and remember which story we used. Yes, right. The Daily Beast's story. Russian citizens are now being prepared for nuclear war. And that was a bit of a surprise, but we read a little bit about the basis of this, which was reiterated over the weekend. This is where we stand. Did you know that over in Russia, and I don't know how well this is penetrated into the Russian, man on the streets consciousness, and I know we should probably be saying person on the street at this point, but they're Russians, and they'll insist that we talk to their men first, and that's probably wrong to think about all Russians, but there you have it. Anyway, the average, I don't know whether the average Russian thinks this, or whether this is just the government working, or what passes for the government there, or a figment of their imagination, our imagination, I don't know what, but it looks for all the world through the reporting that's available to us like the Russian quote-unquote government is in fact preparing for this major conflict, and that in the Russian mind, whatever that is and whatever it might represent, we are on the brink of armed conflict with Russia over an ultimatum that they issued, the deadline for which is coming up in just a few days. I would like to emphasize to the Russian government and people and whoever's listening that, and I'm not certain that it's super productive to do so. I don't know whether I'll infuriate them further, but I think they should have a fairly clear picture of what's going on before they do something like this. Americans have zero idea. I would venture to say that less than 1% of America has any idea that Russia issued an ultimatum. Did you know? As it turns out, they issued this ultimatum. They have it's like etched in their brains. The December 17th ultimatum, the messages of December 17th. Apparently, and I say that advisedly, I want them to know that we think of it this way. Apparently, on December 17th, the Russian government issued a draft text, like Bernie Kerik, a draft text of 2 proposed treaties, and demanded that within, I think they said 20 days, that the United States, and this is a unilateral thing, a bilateral treaty, a unilateral thing for us to accept the treaty, bilateral for us to have that treaty. We were supposed to accept both, not one or the other. They emphasize that it's not a choice as between the two, but that they both go hand in hand, that we accept the terms of this treaty as they've dictated it to us, or else we would basically be at war. That the Russians feel, and it all stems from something that you do know something about. But if this comes as a total surprise to you, you're not alone, not by a long shot. Most people have no idea, and they have no idea. I can't even tell you for sure when the deadline date is. I've looked around, actually, and I can't pin it down. But if it was issued on December 17th, and we have 20 days, that's what, 27 December 37th is the answer to that, which I guess puts us 6 days into January 6th. What? That's a bad time. We've been wondering all this time, like, well, when might Russia, pull the ripcord on this thing and make their move in Ukraine or wherever it is that they're planning on making their move. And we pondered the possibility of them doing it over Christmas when we were distracted by Christmas. We've pondered the possibility of their doing it over New Year's when we were distracted by New Year's. Neither one of those two things happened. But as it happens, I guess the deadline comes down on January 6th, when we'll also likewise be preoccupied, but not in the same way that we would have been with Christmas and New Year's. So it makes like those 2 days maybe strategically more important. Or maybe it's just trolling that they would do it on January 6th. Anyway, I don't know if that's the date that they have in mind, but I mentioned to you on Friday that they're thinking this thing. So there's more detail on it that I think we ought to share. Now, the short versions of it are out here. I'll give you the short version of it I got one from The Week and then a slightly longer one from The Guardian, but I guess the shortest version of it was from The Week. And then I'll read through a piece that's a little more dense, and it's made dense by the inclusion of a lot of quotes from the Russian actors in this drama. And their English is a little dense and difficult to understand. It's excellent English, far better than my Russian, certainly, which is, I know no Russian, but you got to be impressed with their bilingualism or the work of their translators. But either way, it ends up being a little difficult to understand, but very typically Russian. So here's the thing from The Week, which I don't usually turn to for this stuff. I think I landed on this piece and an earlier piece from The Guardian that explains it, back closer to the December 17th issuance of these treaties and the ultimatum surrounding it, but which I missed. But both of these pieces I stumbled upon when I tried to Google out, okay, so when is the deadline? What's the date I'm supposed to be worried about here? So here's the thing from The Week by Grayson Quay, Q-U-A-Y, unless that's Key and the French pronunciation of it, I don't know. But anyway, here's the deal. Why do I have this? Airlines have canceled 15,000 U.S. flights on Christmas Eve. That's the wrong piece. Almost certainly. Why did that come up first? Although, interesting news, but not what I was looking for from The Week. Dang. Can I... what the hell is this doing here? All right. I must have scrolled the wrong way and picked up the wrong piece. All right. So fine. Let me skip. That was annoying and disappointing, but at least I have a backup, unless The Guardian likewise is screwed up. No, I got the slightly longer version from The Guardian. Let's go with that. This is from earlier, December 17th, as I mentioned, right at the beginning of this. Russia issues list of demands it says must be met to lower tensions in Europe. So it is about Ukraine, and I think we have a pretty good background understanding by comparison among Americans to the fact that there's an issue with Ukraine. But, of course, we know it for a different reason, which is ultimately was the first impeachment of Donald Trump. But you remember what that was all about. Why was he blackmailing Ukraine? What was he holding out on Ukraine? He was holding out on the distribution of defensive weapons to them because they're being invaded by Russia. And we're all just wondering, when does Russia decide we're going to just take the whole place? Well, I guess this is about that. Russia issues list of demands it says must be met to lower tensions in Europe. Contentious security guarantees Moscow is seeking include a ban on Ukraine from entering NATO. That's at the heart of all of this. Andrew Roth reports again for The Guardian. And this will ring more familiar with people. Ukraine interested in increasing its ties with the West, westernizing, as we used to say back in the Cold War days, and joining NATO and joining Europe as a whole. And of course, we all learned, well, I don't know, a lot of us learned back in the day about when we were back in the Soviet times, we were learning about what was at the root of Soviet paranoia about the West. And part of it was that, and I think they had us pegged pretty good. We were expansionist and, as they said, imperialist, and maybe that fits the bill too. Not to take their side in it, but they were worried about their own national security, and that traditionally the Russians have been wary of this sort of thing because being on, the edge of the European continent, they've had their share of experience with European territorial war, long history of that. And so they viewed post-World War II the establishment of client communist states across Eastern and Central Europe as a buffer zone between them and the, as they saw it, expansionist West, and that the expansionist imperialist West would have that much more difficulty invading Russia if they had to roll through client communist states first. And over the years, as those allies have fallen away and the Warsaw Pact ends with the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, and eventually the whole thing dissolves, and even the Soviet republics break away from the country and establish themselves as independent countries. And as those independent countries then swing west and join NATO, they're feeling more and more threatened, which to us probably makes less sense because I think we know. I guess we all have that feeling, but there's no way to prove it to people who are worried about the opposite, that we have no interest in invading Russia. And I think we've all learned that from playing Risk, from reading history. It's just, it's a bad bet trying to invade Russia for a number of reasons. But also, who cares? Why would we want to do something like that? It's not something that Americans are interested, for the most part, in spending blood and treasure on. But the Russians don't know that, and of course, it would be very difficult for them to convince themselves that they were not worthy of our expenditure of blood and treasure. Why? Of course we are. Russia's a gem, a jewel in the crown of whatever crown it is you're talking about. To them, of course, it's worth conquering because they've conquered it. It's a nice place, right? We live here. Why wouldn't you want to come here and take all our stuff? Especially now, and even if you're like, well, it's cold and miserable, that's why we don't want it. Oh, yes, but natural gas and oil, and well, now you're talking. We've gone to many miserable places and stayed there if there was oil to be had. That you've got us there. We might actually want to do something like that. Anyway, so they're worried about it, and they don't want Ukraine in the palm of the West and joining NATO because it's right up against their borders. So they're bringing up all the lessons they know we've been taught all those years, that the Russians simply will not tolerate that sort of threat to them. We understand it innately, but anyway, but we still don't feel like we're not violating your sovereignty. We're not even violating Ukrainian sovereignty. We'll work with them as partners. They'll be a sovereign partner and all of this stuff. If they are uninterested in invading you, then so are we. So, and even if they are interested in invading you, we're not. So what's the problem? Well, they don't believe us. That's the problem. So back on December 17th, here's how Andrew Roth reported it for The Guardian. Russia has put forward a highly contentious list of security guarantees it says it wants the West to agree to in order to lower tensions in Europe and defuse the crisis over Ukraine, including many elements that have already been ruled out. So what are they asking for? And that's basically what's going on here. They proposed 2 treaties. We have not negotiated this treaty. We're not interested in this treaty. They've just handed us this treaty. The treaty is you're not allowed to invade Ukraine. You're not allowed to occupy Ukraine. You can't put your weapons in Ukraine. You can't give them weapons. You can't invade us. We want legal and binding guarantees that you won't do any of these things. It's not enough that you say, but we have no interest in it, even though that's how you determine what Americans are going to do. If you can get an honest accounting of whether or not we have an interest, then you'll know. Much better for you than legally binding us to anything. That we could break all the time. But can we make sure that we have no interest? And unfortunately, the reality probably is, I don't know know if I can get you that guarantee. Because as you mentioned before, you have vast oil and gas reserves, and that's worth money. And there will always be somebody here in the United States who will say, I would risk the death of millions of my fellow citizens, but not me, in order to personally seize control of extraordinarily valuable assets and liquidate them so that I can roll in cash while I'm evaporating in a nuclear explosion. People will do that. They're right about that. So, what are they demanding? The demands include a ban on Ukraine entering NATO and a limit to the deployment of troops and weapons to NATO's eastern flank, in effect returning NATO forces to where they were stationed in 1997 before an eastward expansion. The 8-point draft treaty was released by, it's a draft, right? It was released by Bernie Kerik, but it was released by Russia's foreign ministry as its forces massed within striking distance of Ukraine's borders. Moscow said ignoring its interests would lead to a military response similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Crap, we hated that crisis. Vladimir Putin has demanded that the West provide Russia legal guarantees of its security. Now, what does legal guarantee mean to mobster government? I don't know, but maybe it's just a demand that we're never really meant to be able to meet anyway, even if we wanted to. But the Kremlin's aggressive proposals are likely to be rejected in Western capitals as an attempt to formalize a new Russian sphere of influence over Eastern Europe. That is likely. The demands, spelled out by Moscow in full for the first time, were handed over to the U.S. this week. That was, again, back on December 17th. They include a demand that NATO remove any troops or weapons deployed to countries that entered the alliance after 1997, which would include much of Eastern Europe, including Poland, the former Soviet countries of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and the Balkan countries. Russia has also demanded that NATO rule out further expansion, including the accession of Ukraine into the alliance, and that it does not hold drills without previous agreement from Russia in Ukraine, anywhere in Eastern Europe, in Caucasus countries, the Caucasus Mountains, such as Georgia, or in Central Asia. These proposals are likely to be viewed extremely negatively by NATO countries, in particular Poland and the Baltic states, which are like, well, we joined NATO and you said you would defend us. And does this not bring back to you, by the way, the recollection of how weird Donald Trump was about NATO and how odd it was to have an American president saying, sitting president, and he sat a lot. He sat around the room, as they used to say, right? But remember him saying that NATO was problematic, that NATO was horrible, that we should dissolve NATO, that America should withdraw from NATO, that NATO doesn't pay its own way, etc. That was his excuse, but that he was looking to dissolve NATO. Nothing could have been more interesting to someone like Vladimir Putin. And it's weird that an American president would start saying such things, like traitor weird, that kind of level of weird. Anyway, those proposals ordinarily, right, are likely to be viewed extremely negatively by NATO countries, particularly those that are targeted, right, and that joined NATO because they were always targeted by Russia. Poland and the Baltic states, who've been occupied by Russia in the past, have the same paranoia about Russia that Russia has about the West. They want legal guarantees that they won't be occupied by the Russians again, and one of them, what that was available to them, is sign up, become part of NATO. Part of the whole premise of NATO is if Russia invades you, we'll push them out. That's about as good a legal guarantee. You can't ask Russia, please sign this contract that says you won't invade us, because, you know, they've had one of those before and it doesn't work. So they, you know, to put the Russian demand in an understandable light, like it's not just from out of nowhere. The Baltic states and Poland demand essentially the same thing, or we're looking for the best they could get along the same lines, a legal guarantee that they wouldn't be invaded. Anyway, so like we said, they'll be negatively viewed. They have warned these eastern states that Russia is attempting to reestablish a sphere of influence in the region, and they view the document as proof that Moscow is seeking to limit their sovereignty. A senior U.S. official said on Friday that the Kremlin knows that some parts of its proposals were unacceptable, and they probably just didn't care. The NATO head, Jens Stoltenberg, has already ruled out any agreements denying Ukraine the right to enter the military alliance, saying it is up to who? Ukraine and the 30 NATO countries. That's who. There are already major obstacles to Ukraine entering the alliance, including its territorial dispute with Russia over annexed Crimea. The Russian document also calls for the two countries to pull back any short or medium-range missile systems out of reach, replacing the previous intermediate-range nuclear forces, or INF, treaty that the U.S. left in 2018, thanks to Donald Trump. Weird. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue to untangle or bring to your attention even the issue with Russia and these unknown treaty texts and what they're after. We left off by pointing out that one of the other demands made in the two treaties is the removal of all short and medium range missile systems, presumably from both sides, but replacing the previous INF, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, that the U.S. left in 2018. And again, pointing out that was at Donald Trump's direction. Otherwise a pretty effective treaty, but oddly abandoned for no particular reason by the United States, apparently. The White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said the U.S. had seen proposals from Russia to start talks. That would be a more normal way, perhaps, of beginning this conversation, and was speaking with its European allies and partners, Reuters reported. There will be no talks on European security without our European allies and partners, Psaki told reporters. That, of course, is not the way the Russians actually want it, and we'll find that out in a lengthier article to follow. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Rybakov, said on Friday, again, back in mid-December, that there was no deadline for talks, but that Russia wants to begin negotiations, quote, without delays and without stalling. So maybe the deadline thing was not as hard and fast as we were led to believe, or maybe there is no deadline, or maybe he's talking out of his hat. I'm not really sure. And maybe December 17th wasn't the date of issuance of these two treaties either. It may have been just the day that it was first reported. So maybe tying it to January 6th isn't an actual thing. But then again, maybe it is. Anyway, we continue to hear from Sergei Rybakov here, Deputy Foreign Minister. We can go any place and any time, even tomorrow, he said, in inanimated remarks, by which I assume they mean the spirit in which he offered the remarks and not that it was a short cartoon. Asked whether he thought the requests were unreasonable, he said no. This is not about us giving some kind of ultimatum. There is none. The thing is that the seriousness of our warning should not be underestimated, he said. Well, of course, the Deputy Foreign Minister is one of their top diplomats, and he can see the wisdom of trying to soften the blow and say, well, it's not an ultimatum. Well, there's no ultimatum. Everybody else, though, is saying, yeah, ultimatum. So who do you believe? Dmitry Trenin, the head of the Carnegie Moscow Center, wrote that Russia's public release of its proposed agreements, quote, may suggest that Moscow, rightly, considers their acceptance by the West unlikely. This logically means that Russia will have to assure its security single-handedly, most probably by miltech, that is, military technical means, he wrote. Western countries have warned that Russia may be preparing for an invasion of Ukraine in January as Russian tanks, artillery, and missiles have massed near borders. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, you remember him, the guy who was on the phone with Trump, right, has called on the West for additional aid in case Russia decides to launch a broader offensive. On Friday, Ukraine said one of its soldiers was killed during fighting with Russian-backed separatists in the east of the country. He was reportedly killed in an attack using grenade launchers and mortars. The latest death brings Ukraine's toll in the simmering conflict to 65 since the start of the year, according to an AFP tally based on official figures. Compared with 50 in 2020, the conflict in eastern Ukraine has so far left more than 13,000 people dead. Russia has massed about 100,000 troops on its side of the border. That's serious. Joe Biden has warned Putin of, quote, sanctions like he's never seen. Oh boy, it has to be in like Trump terms. Maybe he thinks that's the only thing that gets through to Putin. Should his troops attack Ukraine. On Thursday, European Union leaders urged Moscow to halt its military buildup and return to talks led by France and Germany. But will they do it? We don't know. Let me read you this other piece, which is a little scarier. But again, the point here for our Russian listeners, if there are any, Russia, if you're listening, apparently on the Russian side, they're like, well, we've delivered our ultimatum. We have told them what we're going to do. We have told them how we're going to do it. And if they don't listen, then it's their own fault. You'll see that sentiment a lot more in this other piece. On the American side, and by the way, it could mean actual war, up to and including nuclear war. They actually threaten that explicitly in this other article. And on the American side, it's like, I'm kind of vaguely aware that there's something going on in Ukraine, but I thought I saw in the news just the other day that Biden was talking to Putin on the phone or something. But I guess, yeah, like on the U.S. side, we're like, well, I guess we'll be maybe imposing some sanctions. And on the Russian side, they're like, no, this is it. Nuclear war, Cuban Missile Crisis starting now. Oh, and I wonder, like, is there any hesitation? Would there be any hesitation among the Russian people? And would it matter if they were like at the last minute, they were like, wait a minute, before we do this thing, you had us all geared up, but I just found out Americans don't know anything about what's going on. They don't know we've placed any demands on them. How can they respond to demands they don't even know about? Don't do this. But, I don't know how much control they have or whether they care. Anyway, as I mentioned, scarier thing, but I'm a little less sure about this source. I don't know what it is or what I'm looking at here. I know what I'm looking at. It's an article, but it's in, I guess, it's one of the European publications, but which one is it? I don't. Maybe if I go and click on their homepage, that'll tell us. It's Desk Russie, Russian news deciphered for you, fortnightly newsletter in French, although here I'm going to read it to you in English. And you can find it at en.desk-Russie, Russia, right? I guess in French, is that how they say Russian? RUSSIE.EU, so .Europe, like a European publication with an eye on Russia. And I guess they bill themselves as Russian news translated so that you can understand what Russians are telling one another about what's going on. This piece, what does the Russian ultimatum mean? Russian ultimatum to the West mean, by Francois Thom, Thom. And gosh, I don't know. And we should find out. What do Russians think it means? Because that might become important. And it begins this way with some explanatory text. On December 17th, the Russian Foreign Ministry unveiled 2 draft texts, a treaty between the United States and the Russian Federation on security guarantees, and an agreement on measures to ensure the security of the Russian Federation and the member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Those are the 2 titles of the 2 texts that they handed us on December 17th, so they put the date there. Moscow's stated goal is to obtain, quote, legal security guarantees from the United States and NATO. Moscow has requested the United States and its NATO allies to meet the Russian demands without delay. And now some discussion and analysis. The 2 texts are not written according to the principle of a menu, where you can choose one or the other. They complement each other and should be considered as a whole, declared Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov, who previously told the Western outlets, oh, there's no ultimatum, don't worry about it. It's as if they want the United States to be unaware, or remain unaware, largely, of what the Russians say they're demanding. And I don't know who they're looking to fool, us or themselves. The second text is a kind of parallel guarantee because, quote, the Russian Foreign Ministry is fully aware that the White House may not meet its obligations, whatever they may be, and therefore is a separate draft treaty for NATO countries. The Russian maneuver is to bind NATO through the United States, the United States through NATO. There is nothing to negotiate. You have to accept everything as a whole. That does sound rather scary. So again, one is they're looking for the United States a treaty between the United States and the Russian Federation on security guarantees. The other treaty is the backup. We don't believe that Americans would honor this treaty even if we signed it. So this is a treaty between the Russian Federation and NATO. We think that there are European actors who would push to have NATO honor this treaty and thereby bind the United States, even if they won't abide by a bilateral treaty guaranteeing the same. You see what we mean here? Some Russian media, such as the digital newspaper, oh boy, I'm going to have to pronounce these things, Vzglyad, I guess, maybe, is that how you, Vzglyad is the English spelling of it. Give me your best guess. Well, some Russian media, like this one, are already triumphant. What do they say? The world before and the world after December 17th, 2021 are completely different worlds. Like, has that registered with anybody here? The idea that there might be Russians, backed by possibly the Russian military, who see the events of December 17th as so decisive that they'll divide eras by that date. So ask any American, what's the deal with December 17th? And everyone will say, I don't know, what is that? Is that Pearl Harbor Day? No, it's December 7th. December 17th. I don't know. And apparently in Russia, they're like, the revolution of December 17th is happening here. We're going to, and I don't know. Maybe that too might be just among the officialdom. And they may be winking at one another. There's nothing happening December 17th. We don't care. And the Russian people certainly have no understanding of it. But, I don't know, nuclear weapons makes you say, maybe we should pay some attention to this. So, okay, the world before and the world after December 17th, 2021 are completely different worlds. If until now the United States held the whole world at gunpoint, now it finds itself under the threat of Russian military forces. Right? A new era is opening. New heroes are coming. Yikes. And a new Danila Bagrov, a character apparently of the patriotic mobster in the popular film Brat, which I guess is popular in Russia, raising his heavy fist and looking into the eyes of his interlocutor, asks softly, for some reason, again, how strong are you, American? Sounds kind of like, a movie stereotype, but okay. All right. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody. The next section here, an orchestrated blackmail. The Russian blackmail is explicit and is directed at both the Americans and the Europeans. If the West does not accept the Russian ultimatum, they will have to face, quote, a military and technical alternative. Remember Miltech? A military and technical alternative, which might mean, cyber war, certainly, which might explain a step up in troll activity, which might explain a million different things. This, though, according to another Deputy Foreign Minister, Alexander Grushko. The Europeans must also think about whether they want to avoid making their continent the scene of a military confrontation. History, right? They have a choice. Either they take seriously what is put on the table, or they face a military technical alternative. Okay, that might be a military threat. That might be a hacking threat. We don't know. After the publication of the draft treaty, the possibility of a preemptive strike against NATO targets, similar to those they put it, that Israel inflicted on Iran, so that, we're not the only ones doing this, your allies do this too. Typical Russian ploy, right? After the publication of the draft treaty, a possibility of preemptive strike against NATO targets was confirmed by Deputy Minister of Defense Andrei Kartapolov. I'm guessing again at pronunciation. Duma Defense Committee. I don't know why that's included in parentheses, but I guess I don't know whether he spoke to the Duma Defense Committee, serves on the Duma Defense Committee. I don't know the structure of their government there. Our partners must understand that the longer they drag out the examination of our proposals and the adoption of real measures to create these guarantees, the greater the likelihood that they will suffer a preemptive military strike. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm sorry, I threw in the word military. We don't know what kind of preemptive strike it is that they have in mind. But the longer we wait and the longer we drag out examination, like here's 2 treaties you have to sign or we'll kill you. Can I read it? No. Well, you can, but the longer you spend reading it, the greater the likelihood that you'll suffer a preemptive strike. To make things clear, Russia fired a salvo of Zircon hypersonic missiles on December 24th. I don't specifically remember things happening on December 24th, but I do remember that as we were closing out the show prior to Christmas and then once again prior to New Year's, we made mention of the fact that, what's his name? Was it Matt? No, it wasn't Matt Gaetz in this case. It was Madison Cawthorn, who, for some strange reason, started speaking openly about his fear of hypersonic missiles from Russia and how they could wipe out our entire fleet in the Black Sea. And then we wondered, do we even have a Black Sea fleet? And then apparently we've made some sort of incursion into the Black Sea, which I guess we can do because Turkey maintains the gateway to the Black Sea on behalf of NATO, and so we went, and I guess the idea is, the threat is that they could wipe out all of the American ships in the Black Sea with these hypersonic missiles, and they sold Madison Cawthorn on it, and he was willing to do their propaganda work for them by whipping up fear the best he could, which was to say not at all, among Americans by bringing this up. No one's listening to Madison Cawthorn. That's the thing. Anyway, but to make things clear, Russia fired a salvo of Zircon hypersonic missiles on December 24th. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, commented on this event. Well, I hope that the notes of December 17th will be more convincing. That's what he said. And I have to tell you, to the extent that you care, Mr. Peskov, America took no notice. None whatsoever. And I'm not saying that to be like a tough guy. I'm telling you, we don't know what the hell you're talking about. The notes of December 17th will be more convincing. What notes? We haven't seen the notes. Well, surely you've seen our hypersonic missile demonstration. No, we don't know what you're talking about. We thought Madison Cawthorn was crazy. Your messenger that you sent us is an idiot. We'll never take him seriously. You need a better messenger than Madison Cawthorn. At least, at the minimum. Editorialist Vladimir Mozegov, we'll try that pronunciation, added to this mix, to go back to the article, what are our arguments? Good question. I would like to know. Well, first and foremost, of course, our most reliable allies, the Army and the Navy. Okay, they're not your allies, they're your Army and Navy. But to be more precise, the hypersonic Zircon missile, the carrier killer, as it is affectionately called in the West, is it? which makes it absurd for the United States to even have a fleet of aircraft carriers. The impact of the Zircon cracks a destroyer like a nut. Several Zircons will inevitably sink an aircraft carrier. The Zircon simply does its job. It methodically shoots huge, clumsy aircraft carriers like a gun at cans. And it's very tough guy talk, etc. Blah, blah, blah. But I mean, is anybody surprised that armies and navies around the world have developed weapons that they can use to attack aircraft carriers? No, I think we're pretty cool on that. We understood that to be the case. Are they sitting ducks? Yeah, to some extent, yeah. But we've done our best to develop. They're always accompanied by destroyers, and the destroyers have anti-missile systems. But I guess the idea is the hypersonic missiles travel too fast for these systems. That may or may not be true. But okay, that's the nature of the threat. But my bigger point is, no one here knows that you're making that threat. Now you might, but only the 1,000, to 1,500 or so people that are listening to the podcast. An article in the digital newspaper Svpressa, another digital newspaper, Svpressa, eloquently titled Putin's Ultimatum, Russia. If you are, I guess that's it, Putin's Ultimatum. And then then goes on to say, is this the whole title? Yeah, I guess it is, because it's italicized. It's a little difficult when people aren't, first language English here. But the title, I guess, is Putin's Ultimatum. Russia, if you will bury all of Europe and 2/3 of the United States in 30 minutes. That's the title of this article in the digital newspaper there. And this article, it says, dots the I's, and does so in this way with this quote: "The Kremlin will have to prove its position with deeds. It is probably only possible to force the, quote, partners to sit at the negotiating table by coercion. Economically, the Russian Federation cannot compete with the West. There remains war," I guess, as the other way of competing with the West. Military expert Konstantin Sivkov believes that, quote, "to bring the United States and NATO to the negotiating table, some kind of super weapon is needed." It's starting to sound like a science fiction movie. For the moment, Russia does not show this potential to its adversaries, or adversaries, as some people like to say, but it exists. Russia has the capability to use super-powered munitions with a capacity of up to 100 megatons. We must repeat that we are not interested in a world without Russia, as Putin once said, and demonstrate a determination to strike if NATO expands. They view an expansion of NATO as a world without Russia. After that, I can assure you that they, the West, will be afraid. Nothing else can stop them. It is naive to rely on diplomatic procedures. Russia's move is a signal that already radical measures are going to be taken. You refused, so you will have yourselves to blame. And that's always a dangerous situation. They've issued the ultimatum. The fact that we don't have any idea that they issued the ultimatum is just proof to them that we don't care, and we will have to be made to care. And when that happens, that'll be your own fault. It won't be us launching a first strike against you. It will be us giving you a chance and you ignoring it and forcing us. Look what you're going to make me do to you. Not only look what you made me do, but look what you will make me do to you later. An abuser's stance, obviously. Reading the Western press, one is under the impression that nothing is happening. Yes, that's actually my point here. Westerners do not seem to understand what is at stake. And remember here, this is translation, I guess, or an interpretation of Russian news. Well, again, we don't understand what's at stake because we don't think there is anything, because we haven't, from our perspective, we haven't heard word one from you. We don't know what you're talking about. You gave us an ultimatum. They think that only the fate of Ukraine is being decided, which is of less concern to them, Americans, than that of Armenia, judging by the pilgrimages of our presidential candidates. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. Many French officials, and remember this is a French publication, many French officials find it normal that Russia should claim a sphere of influence. They resemble those who in 1939 believed that Hitler's demands would be limited to Danzig. However, one only has to look at the texts proposed by Moscow to understand that the stakes are quite different. This is, again, all very stilted English, but let's continue. The Russian ultimatum demands that, quote, the following be legally established: the renunciation of any enlargement of NATO to the east, the cessation of military cooperation with post-Soviet countries, the withdrawal of American nuclear weapons from Europe, and the withdrawal of NATO armed forces to the borders of 1997. Russia and the United States commit themselves not to deploy nuclear weapons abroad and to withdraw those already deployed, as well as to eliminate nuclear weapons deployment infrastructure outside their territory. Article 4 states in part that the Russian Federation and all participants which were, as of May 27, 1997, member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization shall not deploy their armed forces and armaments on the territory of any other European state, in addition to the forces stationed on that territory as of 27 May 1997. So everybody back to where you were in 1997. And Article 7 specifies that the participants, which are member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, shall refrain from conducting any military activities on the territory of Ukraine, as well as of the other states of Europe, Transcaucasia, and Central Asia. This includes the 14 Eastern European and Balkan states that have become members of NATO in the last 24 years. Thus, in addition to the post-Soviet space, the Moscow Initiative includes a wide range of countries located between Western Europe and Russia, mainly Poland and the Baltic states, which are targeted because additional forces of the NATO alliance have been deployed there, as decided at the NATO summit in Warsaw in 2016. In short, the Russian initiative could help the Americans, this is an interesting way of putting it, help the Americans to quietly leave Central and Eastern Europe, according to the headline of an article posted by the very official think tank Russtrat, Russian strategy, I guess, Russtrat. But it is not only that, the link established between the concept of fundamental security interests, which is introduced for the first time, and the range of missiles obliges the United States to refrain from entering our seas, mainly the Black Sea, but also those of the north. They claim the Baltic, Barents, and Okhotsk. And to stop the flights of American bombers, taking into account the real range of Tomahawks of about 1,800 kilometers, practically over the whole of Europe and most of Asia. The same is true of Japan, for which acceptance of the treaty clauses means the deoccupation and liquidation of American bases in that country. To sum up, the parties exclude the deployment of nuclear weapons outside the national territory and return to the national territory the weapons already deployed outside the national territory at the time of entry into force of this treaty. Commentator Pyotr Akopov points out, Russia has now drawn its red lines very clearly. They imply not only the refusal to expand NATO to the east, but also, as stated in the draft agreement with the alliance, the refusal to conduct any military activity on the territory of Ukraine, as well as other states of Eastern Europe, Transcaucasia, and Central Asia. He adds, it is clear that the United States will repatriate its nuclear weapons only when the Anglo-Saxon project of world domination finally collapses. This is some old Soviet stuff here. But it is good to prepare the ground. If the West does not want to notice our red lines, and we have not, more precisely, if it pretends not to want to notice them, he says, then it is primarily his problem, not ours. This is very Soviet in its formulation. And what is Russia offering in exchange for all the concessions demanded of the West? Does it propose to evacuate Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Crimea, Donbass, since it talks about returning to the situation of 1997? Nothing of the sort. In return, it says it is ready to commit itself not to threaten American security. One remembers a joke from from the Cold War era. What is ours is ours. What is yours is negotiable. I actually do remember that old joke. In a word, Russia is demanding that NATO commit suicide and that the United States be reduced to the role of a regional power. According to Vzglad, one of the publications there, I mangled the pronunciation, I'm sure. America is in fact invited to stand behind its Hercules columns, and that is sick notation there, and to keep quiet on its islands. And this means that de facto, whatever the answer to the proposals, the American world as such for Russia has ceased to exist. As a result, Russia will have the upper hand in Europe. The countries of Western Europe are already taken for granted, with Moscow counting on the pool of collaborators that it has cultivated for years within the European ruling elites. It has just sent them a strong signal by appointing François Fillon as director of the petrochemical giant Sibur. Not a signal to me, but maybe to France. Deprived of American support, the Russophobic countries that crystallize the resistance to Moscow's hegemony will only have to bow to the inevitable. According to Russtrat, of course Poland and the Baltic countries will be unhappy, but they will probably be the only ones to oppose the American withdrawal from Central and Eastern Europe. After all, the rest of the young Europeans are guided by the position of the core of the European Union, the Western European countries, and they do not have stable anti-Russian complexes.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's an awful lot to swallow, and of course there's more to this very dense piece, but I hope you get the idea. And if it freaked you out, well, okay, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is next. Justice Putnam might not be talking about all these things. He might be more focused on January 6th, as he should be. I just feel like I wanted to put that out there. Sorry.